Let's talk a little bit about how Pandafold flattens models. So we're going to use the Create Seam on Plane tool to create a pattern that we couldn't actually make. So this tool allows us to create seams on a plane. We're going to click somewhere on our model. Let's click up here and let's create that seam. At this point, we have our seam here, and let's try to cut a pattern here. So what the software does is it is going to create a flood fill for this, and then it's going to use a whole bunch of mathematical constraints to flatten the pattern. But the big thing to notice here is if we look at our scale, there's almost nothing that's ideal here. But yet the software created a flattened pattern. If we were to cut this out, it's not going to fit over that shape. So what the software is doing is it's telling us that by so little of this being green, this is not a very good pattern. The best pattern we could get is going to be something that's entirely green. So it's up to us to figure out how to use the software to improve the fit of patterns. So let's walk through a bit of an example here and see how we would make a pattern to fit this shape here. So this pattern has a big loose area here, and it has red around the edges. So we have a couple of different tools to consider or approaches when we're making this pattern. So the first thing we could do is we could actually create a shape that tries to cut out this blue area. What that allows to have happen is now the software can, by having a second shape here, shrink this to take out all of that additional fabric that's not needed. But we would still have these red areas here. But because of the way the flattening works, if we make an adjustment to a pattern, it might have side effects or consequences that we won't know until we try it. So let's try that approach. So this still has a blue area here, but let's see how this looks. So this shifted this all around. So this approach may not actually work for us. Let's go back and see if we could take out this. Although now we're kind of getting to an onion of patterns, which is not a place that I wanted to get to. So that's green. So that's green. So now we could call these sufficient. There's some amount of blue or red that you may want to live with. The way the software is set up is maximum anything beyond 10% loose is just going to be solid blue, and anything beyond 10% tight is just going to be solid red. So now if we go back here, we could try to make this work on the outer pattern. So what we could do is we could try splitting this in two. So let's try to improve this one a little bit. Maybe a dart would help here. So this is great. It's all green. This is pretty awful. I would not want to sow this. Let's take a look at a very different approach here. I don't want to delete all of them. So, as an alternative approach, what often makes sense to do is look at the curvature of the model and split the pattern into multiple pieces that way. So in this case, I'm going to look at this line right here, and I recognize that this is mostly a large flat area. So let's add a line there. This still has this blue area here. Let's see if we can get rid of that. So when there's a blue area, what often makes sense to, or a loose area, what often makes sense to do is try splitting the pattern up into two pieces. So let's see what happens if we split it here. And there's two different strategies for splitting here. And what we choose, whether or not we go vertically or horizontally, will depend upon our project requirements. So now we have these two pieces here that fit pretty well. Now let's see if we can make this one fit. So at this point, depending upon our project requirements, we could decide to split this in two, or we could try to add a dart. Let's add a dart for this red area here. So we're going to go from the center of the red area to the edge of the pattern. So that got rid of that tight area. If we go to our 2D layout view, we can see the value of this dart. When I say the value of it, I mean how much does it actually contribute to loosening or improving the fit? I shouldn't say loosening, but improving the fit of our pattern. That's a fairly significant amount. If it was a millimeter or less, I wouldn't bother with that dart. But we still have this blue area here. Let's see what we can do to get that to a better place. Again, I would probably split this pattern in two. That's pretty good. So the strategies that I tend to use is if I have a tight area, I will try drawing a dart from the center of it. If I have a blue area, I will tend to cut the pattern in half because it's easier to sew. Although sometimes I will create an inner hole or a cutout or diamond, some way to allow that inner piece of fabric to shrink. But ultimately, how much you want to spend or how well you want the fit of the pattern depends upon your project and upon the material that you're using. I hope this was helpful.